the phrase that too much of a good thing is bad? Yeah? It's the same thing with inflammation, okay? So inflammation is actually a part of our immunity. It's a very healthy and a very normal response from our immunity whenever we get hurt. So for example, if I end up cutting my finger, the first response of my body is going to be to send inflammatory factors there so that it can kind of create a room for healing. However, what happens is, with certain factors that we will see, inflammation exceeds its welcome. So it stays for a longer time than it needs to, and that causes a lot of problems in our body, including many of the chronic diseases that many people go through. And it is something also known as a silent factor of many diseases, because there can be inflammation for a long time, but we might not even be able to detect it, and it cannot even be shown because it is very low grade. Now, there are some very simple symptoms of inflammation. Now, pain, heat, redness, swelling and loss of function, this must have been felt by everyone whenever someone gets hurt. You can feel the place where you're hurt, that it heats up a little bit, it shows a little bit of redness, it will be painful. So those are normal inflammation symptoms. However, when we talk about chronic inflammation, which is what causes the diseases, you will feel generally sick, tired, and you will just have a little bit of fever, or you will feel feverish from inside, but you might not show any temperature. So those are symptoms of chronic inflammation, which means long-term inflammation. So these are the two types. Acute inflammation is the short-term inflammation, which generally means that when you have an instant injury anywhere, that's what you're going to have. You're going to have an acute inflammation, which means it's very small time stay for inflammation. But when the inflammation stays for a prolonged period of time, for example months or even years, that is termed as chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is also known as silent inflammation, which means that very low grade inflammation may stay in our bodies for years, and it may be damaging our cells and tissues for a prolonged period of time, but we might not know it because clinically it will not show up because it is very low grade, but it is present, and chronic inflammation leads to all of the diseases. Now, these are the risk factors of inflammation. Obesity, I'll go one by one. So obesity is basically a risk factor because there are some things known as adipokines, which are small proteins that are released by our fat cells that lead to cause the inflammation, and that triggers our immune system to basically cause inflammation. So that is why having excess of fat cells lead us to having more inflammation. Insulin resistance. So insulin resistance goes both ways. If you have inflammation or excess inflammation, you will end up having insulin resistance, and if you have insulin resistance, you will end up having inflammation, because there are certain functions of both of these diseases, if I may say so, that kind of trigger each other. So having insulin resistance, or type 2 diabetes also, which is of course a sister of obesity. If someone is obese, they are more or less likely to have diabetes and also insulin resistance. So that is one of the things. And diet high in inflammatory foods. We are going to see what are the inflammatory foods, but food has a major impact in all of the diseases, including inflammation. Though it is not technically a disease, it's a condition, but still it can be triggered by foods. And even in conditions such as arthritis or even osteoarthritis, where inflammation is a big deal, there are phases of remission, which means when the inflammation is low, pain is low, and the patient feels okay. And then there are the flare-ups, which means the sessions where they have extreme amounts of inflammation, and so they have a lot of pain. And food is actually a factor, because if your diet is high in inflammatory foods, that means that they will have more pain, and they will have more flare-ups, and they will have lesser time between the remissions and the flare-ups. Then lack of physical activity or over-exercise. So as I've said, inflammation actually can occur when your body is injured. So when you exercise and over-exercise or over-exert your body, you will have a ton of inflammation, which might go down or might stay. It depends on many other factors as well. But yes, over-exercise is not good. Now, lack of exercise is also not good, because that will obviously lead you to have insulin resistance, obesity. You're going to gain a lot of weight if you're not physically active. And especially this is a problem with sedentary lifestyle people who have a desk job 9 to 5. They do find it very difficult to be active, but yeah, you need to keep it moving somehow. Maybe the weekends, but depends on everyone. Untreated injuries. Now, injuries is actually one place where if you're injured, you're going to have inflammation, but for a prolonged period of time, if your injuries are not healed, or you don't actually do something about your injured body part, may it be a knee, be an elbow, or be even a cut or a bruise, or even an internal injury, if you do not end up treating it, then that inflammation is not going to go down. So our immune system will constantly think that you're in a phase of injured or injury, or you're in a phase of stress, and it's going to constantly keep on producing pro-inflammatory factors, which actually lead to a lot of inflammation, and hence you can also end up creating yourself an inflammatory disease. So untreated injuries are also one of the things. Stress. Now psychological stress also, forget physical stress, even psychological stress has been directly linked with inflammation. So if you are stressed, which is all of us, and nobody can actually do much about stress nowadays, everyone is stressed, so that is a great big factor. And actually, to reduce stress, one of the best ways, which is also given in a lot of papers and stuff, is breath work, which is breath work, breathing, and yoga and exercise, and something that calms you down, something that relaxes you. It's really going to relieve stress, and it's going to lower the amount of cortisol that you have. Now cortisol is actually a hormone that is produced during stress, and its first action is to reduce inflammation. Alright, so the first action of a stress hormone is to reduce the inflammation in our body. But what happens is, if you have a stress over a long period of time, you're going to have a lot of cortisol, and again, a lot of anything good is bad, so a lot of cortisol will lead to inflammation. So there are certain diseases that are related to inflammation, and there are a lot more, but these are the 4 ones that I have picked. So atherosclerosis is basically a plaque or a clot formation in your arteries that leads to a lot of cardiac issues, and also can lead to a stroke or a heart attack. Now atherosclerosis is kind of a chronic inflammatory disease, because this can begin, end, and also the entire duration of atherosclerosis is a result of inflammation. The plaque or the clot, that we say it in a normal language, is formed due to inflammation, and then its rupturing also happens due to inflammation, and the heart attack or anything that leads after that is also a result of constant inflammation. Then cancer. So cancer is actually tumor, right? Cancer is formed because of tumor. So tumor grows in places wherever it finds inflammation, because the job of inflammation is basically to create an environment filled with a good blood supply. And tumor cells, when they get good blood supply, they grow and they nurture and they develop, which we don't want, because that leads to cancer. So cancer and inflammation is again directly related. Autoimmune diseases, there are so many, but rheumatoid arthritis is the one that I've picked. It is basically a systemic inflammation disease, which means that you have inflammation all over your body, and especially in your joints, you're gonna feel a lot of pain during the flare-up sessions, as I've mentioned. Whenever you consume something that is pro-inflammatory, or whenever you are going through a lifestyle which supports inflammation, you're gonna have a lot of pain. However, with an anti-inflammatory diet, and of course there are again medications as well, so that is also related to inflammation. The last one is actually depression. Now this is something that is not, it's not said that it's 100% related, or it doesn't understand the relation between it. Either depression causes inflammation or inflammation causes depression, but whenever there is depression, inflammation is also present, and antidepressants or antidepressant medications actually lower inflammation. And anti-inflammatory drugs are also kind of prescribed sometimes during depression. So there is a correlation between them. And so yeah, these are the 4 diseases. There are so many more, and all the diseases that relate to pain is actually one or the other way related to inflammation. These are the foods that kind of trigger your inflammation. Now they are straight related to what the risk factors are. So refined carbohydrates and sugary foods, they will spike insulin level. They're going to help you gain weight, which is something that we don't want, because obesity as well as insulin resistance is something that is a risk factor for inflammation. Then we have fried food and excess protein, animal protein. So of course there is no harm in eating animal proteins, but excess amounts of it, or consuming just animal proteins, is actually not good, because it is filled with omega-6 fatty acids, which is a pro-inflammatory fatty acid, which means it increases inflammation. And fried foods, of course, trans fats and saturated fats are not good, because they also tend to lead to weight gain, so hence it affects our inflammatory status. Processed meats, all the nitrites that are present in the processed meats, all the chemicals that are present, that can really trigger inflammatory responses in our body, and they're not good. Excess alcohol. Now Alcohol is actually a weird thing, because alcohol in a limited or moderate quantity is really going to help you to lower the insulin, because for example red wine, it contains resveratrol, which is an anti-inflammatory agent, and that is really helpful. However, if you consume excess of inflammation, it is going to lead to a lot of if you consume excess of alcohol, you're going to lead to a lot of inflammation. Nightshade vegetables are actually vegetables that contain alkaloids. So these are going to be potatoes, tomatoes, bell peppers. All of these come under the category of nightshades. These contain alkaloids which really increase inflammation, and of course then they also trigger a lot of inflammatory pain in the body. So they are not suggested. However, sweet potatoes are not a nightshade vegetable, so they are absolutely okay to consume. Antigens are something that triggers an immune response in us. That means that it makes us kind of sensitive to our immunity, and immunity is what causes inflammation, and hence antigens from food, these are mostly something that you might slightly be affected by. For example, some people aren't actually celiac disease patients, but they do have a sensitivity to gluten, so it can be said that gluten for them is an antigen. Now, excess of omega-6 fatty acids, again excess of animal proteins, omega-6 fatty acids, they really increase inflammation. Anti-inflammatory foods. So these are the foods that help you to reduce inflammation, and they help you to stay pain free, and they kind of help you to help your mobility altogether, because inflammation does affect your joints a lot. And so whenever you have anti-inflammatory diet, you're going to feel much lighter, and you're going to feel much more flexible, because you're not going to have the stiffness. So fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, they are packed with phytonutrients, which means plant chemicals that are really good for us, and they really help to lower the inflammation, and they're also antioxidant. Tons of fiber, which helps to reduce weight as well, and also reduces the absorption of sugar in our blood, which means it doesn't trigger insulin so much, and so also prevents kind of insulin resistance. Then we have whole grains. So of course we need a base of carbohydrate, but why not choose the healthier one? So whole grains such as quinoas, oats, bulgur, or even whole wheat bread and whole wheat pastas and everything, they're all allowed, they're all good, and there are tons of fiber and vitamins in them, so it's great. Fermented foods and drinks. So fermented foods, because the immune system is also present in our gut, and the gut microflora is actually very much dependent on the amount of pre and probiotics that we consume. So fermented drinks and foods are going to provide the probiotics that we really need for our body. For example, if you eat natural foods, as I said, omega-6 is an inflammatory food, right? But here I've also mentioned fishes like salmons and trouts, which contain omega-3s. But the problem is when you eat from supplements. For example, if you were to take a supplement of omega-3, you're getting only omega-3 and only omega-6. But when you eat from nature, when you eat the whole food, you're getting a balance of all the nutrients. Omega-6 and omega-3 never basically occur separately in nature. They will occur together, but in different ratios. So even if you eat anti-inflammatory foods, it's absolutely fine. If it's foods, it's fine. If you're overdoing it with the supplements, then yeah, obviously that will have side effects. A very basic and thumb rule should be that you consume something for 3 months, and then you give a 1 month break, no matter what supplement it is, and then you go back to it again, because that's going to give your body time to kind of just detox from all the supplements also, because yes, it's vitamins and nutrients, and yes, it's very nutritious and good for us, but you shouldn't overdo it. Like inflammation, you know, a little bit is good, but a lot is not. So yeah, so fermented foods. And soybean is actually an anti-inflammatory food, and that also means that it is a great source of protein. Since we are not really trying to have any of the animal proteins with us, we will try our best to compensate for that protein using soybean. If someone is not okay with soybean, they should opt for fish or more of a seafood or omega-3 fatty acid rich diet, especially with respect to proteins. Then nuts and seeds. Now, nuts and seeds have great fiber, plus it also has good fatty acids, so it has good fats and it keeps you satiated. So these are amazing as snacks as well, and they're obviously included in our anti-inflammatory foods. Moderate amount of red wine. So excess alcohol is going to cause inflammation, but little bit is not going to cause inflammation. It's actually going to be very good. And this one is especially good, red wine especially good, because it contains a phytonutrient called resveratrol, which is present in red grapes. So for people like me who can't drink red wine, so I will go for red grapes. Physical activity, even for a person who is going through arthritis or who is going through any form of a disease that kind of causes them to not have the amount of mobility that they would have if they didn't have the inflammatory disease, 3 times a week, even the smallest amounts of motion that they can do, walking, cycling, anything that they're comfortable with, to be very honest, should be done, because inflammation reduces when you exercise. If you don't exercise, your inflammation is again going to increase, because you're going to accumulate a lot more fat, and that is going to release a lot more pro-inflammatory factors, and that's going to lead to more inflammation. Get enough of sleep. So not being able to sleep a complete restful hours, now I'm not going to say 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever, because it might differ from me to you. So every person needs a different amount of time to sleep. However, how do you know that you have slept nicely? In the morning, you don't want to go back to bed. That is a sign of a good night's of sleep. So when you wake up, you're fresh, you're happy, your mood is good, and you don't feel like going back to bed. That is how you know that you have slept a full night's sleep. And that's very important, because if you don't sleep, your cortisol levels are going to go higher, and as I've mentioned before, extremely high cortisol leads to inflammation. And try to reduce stress. So stress, psychological, physical, whatever it is, it leads to inflammation, and it is related directly, not even indirectly, directly to many diseases. So try and reduce stress as much as you can. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. So here is a very typical anti-inflammatory diet that I would give. And first of all, what do you guys think? Can you actually eat this? So what would be your idea of another breakfast?
I normally have like overnight oats with fruit.
Oh yeah.
Or I have wholemeal toast with Marmite. That's not my normal.
Okay. Actually, coffee has anti-inflammatory effects. However, in people with rheumatoid arthritis, it might trigger inflammation. So again, it differs from person to person, it differs from disease to disease, what you're going through, even if it is just inflammation. Turmeric contains curcumin, which is actually an anti-inflammatory. So that's amazing. That is great. Green tea also has anti-inflammatory factors. Tea also has anti-inflammatory factors, black tea. The thing is, if you put sugar in it, then it doesn't have that much anti-inflammation, but just black tea is amazing.
Special teas that reduce inflammation?
Yeah, they might have, yeah. So it depends on the ingredients that they have, but teas have catechins and they are anti-inflammatory. Catechins, they're again flavonols. They're a group of nutrients that are present in teas that really help you to reduce inflammation.
Right.
So teas, especially even black tea, just regular black tea with maybe a drop or 2 of lemon if you like, but no sugar, no milk, it's going to be anti-inflammatory. So all of these drugs, they are not as safe, and they don't actually cure any problems. They just kind of reduce it for that moment, and then later on you're going to see it again. So natural foods such as flax seeds, turmeric, green tea, these things are really good, and these things really help reduce inflammation and also the pain. Finger millet.
Where do you get that?
You'd find it in any grocery store. It's not very rare or anything. It's very easily available. It's very economical, and it really helps to reduce weight as well as inflammation.
And you have that like